Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out the Americanization of Britain.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Britain versus America. These two nations have long been in a tug of war of power and influence. The Brits, we gave Americans their language, we gave them their legal system, we gave them the Beatles, and in return they gave us fighting over Black Friday deals and obesity.
Rival firms are spending millions battling for the best, most expensive sites. In the burger boom, the gamble is that Britain will go for fast food in a big way.
However, and it does pain me to admit this, over the years, Britain has kind of lost its influence and has slowly turned more and more into the nation that it created many, many years ago. But how did that happen? Today, we will explore the Americanization of Great Britain.
Britain and the United States share values of freedom, of democracy and enterprise, and I look forward to building on the special relationship.
She looks like she smells bad to me. Guinness is good for you.
Special relationship.
This means a special relationship.
That phrase, special relationship, there has not been a special relationship even since the Second World War. We have had cause bitterly to regret blindly following the United States.
Give us your money.
For us to understand, we need to go all the way back to the 18th century. Back then, the Brits ruled the world and we were God's chosen people. I mean, I can understand, look at us. Our influence spread across the world. At one point, we had 120 colonies under our control. And there was one of these colonies that stood out from the rest. A little known country called
USA.
Oh, Jesus. Jesus.
You see, back then in like the 1700s, Americans, they didn't see themselves as Americans. They saw themselves as proud Brits, loyal to the crown and all of that stuff. However, spoiler alert, the American-British love affair, it didn't last forever. In 1756, it all fucking kicks off, right? You have what's called the 7-Year War, which lasted 9 years, where the conflict originated in North America, where the Brits were basically beefing with the French. And like, war isn't cheap, these skims and abyssal whips, they cost a lot of fucking money. And when the war finished, Britain's national debt had doubled, and an economic crisis ensued.
Oh, wow, look at this graph. 1692, near 0% by looks like just after 1812, the war. Wow. Over 250%. And then the Great Depression happened. Yeah, this is probably World War I and the Great Depression. And then World War II. And then fiscal responsibility, 1992, 2012. Okay. Interesting.
The economic crisis was affecting everyone, but particularly the merchants in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. They were going bankrupt. Banks weren't giving out any credit, wages were falling, and the cost of living was going up. And the Brits were sort of responsible for all of this. And so, Parliament cooked up a get-rich-quick scheme. So what we did, we went over and we said, look, lads, don't you worry, got this all under control. What we'll do, right, we'll get you lot to pay us a bunch of taxes and we'll put a load of tariffs on you. Now, you see, the problem for the Americans was that they couldn't fight against this. And that's because they weren't allowed to have anyone sit in Parliament. But the thing is, technically, those Americans under our law were actually English, meaning that, technically, according to the fucking rules, we legally were meant to give them representation in Parliament. And so, the Americans were a little pissed off, and they led a bloody revolution against us.
I've heard of this.
They threw a bunch
That's a great
of our
movie.
fucking tea in the river, and, obviously that was a step.
Do British people like The Patriot? It's a very pro-American, British people are evil kind of movie. Good story. Good craft of a story. Oh, Mel Gibson's Australian, right? What the fuck?
They threw a bunch of our fucking tea in the river. And,
That's right.
Obviously, that was a step too far. So, yeah, pretty bloody war ensued.
That was a step
Very
too
quickly,
far.
in this era, the American identity was in limbo. They'd created their own dope flag, and we would start to see, an
Flag is dope.
American nationalism.
Hey everyone, so I was chatting on AIM with this guy. Supposedly he was from England, and I speak fluent American, so there's a bit of a language barrier.
Oh no.
Before we go any further with this video, I want to give a massive shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace.
Squarespace.
Squarespace is with
Y'all be sure to go to Squarespace and make a website. Make an online store. Sell your crafts, your drawings.
Anyway, back to the video. All right, so I'll admit it. America won, fine. America becomes independent from Britain in 1776. And like, you know,
Heard of that?
we didn't handle it very well. We were kind of like a sort of an obsessive ex. Whilst America were like murdering all the Native Americans, we would actually give the tribes weapons. Also, when the Americans were trying to be cute and put merchant ships to do trade across the seas, the British Navy would just like harass them and make it really hard for them. After a while, America got fed up of Britain's petty, passive-aggressive moves, and they basically said, all right, fine. Me, you, 1v1, snipers only, rust. And so, in 1812, we had another war with America.
Right.
Somehow we got over this one pretty quickly, and we were friends again by 1814. But
Really?
amongst the American pop...
Y'all burned down the White House. I forgive you.
This one pretty quickly, and we were friends again by 1814. But amongst the American population, there was now like a anti-British sentiment. They really didn't like us. In fact, one of the founding fathers, John Adams, in a letter to Thomas Jefferson said, "Britain will never be our friend until we are her master."
Really?
Which really, kind of set the foundation for things to come.
And Britain has shrunk, its place in the world has shrunk, but it's not just shrunk in relation to everyone. It's been very much taken over by the US.
Give us your money.
Now, look, Britain and America, we did some good stuff and we did some bad stuff. And there's this one thing, like one part, there's this part of the history, slavery. We're just going to have to talk about it. Now, look, Britain did abolish slavery, right? In 1834, we abolished it. We even policed the seas to try and get rid of it.
Thank you.
Sort of. Like, okay, after slavery was legally abolished, we didn't have slaves here, but 95% of the raw goods arriving in Liverpool came from American plantations. By 1890, many years on, 50% of American exports went directly to Britain. So, like, we might not have had slavery, but we were definitely benefiting off of it, and it was kind of our dirty little secret.
Shame.
America would eventually have a civil war over slavery, and Britain decided to announce itself as being neutral. Yeah, I get what you mean about the whole slavery thing. Trust me, we don't love it, but the other guys, they have a point, The reason we wanted to stay neutral was so that we could, trade with both the North and the South. That was it. And this fence-sitting really didn't do us favours amongst people in our colonies. The Cabinet Secretary for our colonies said that Britain had no allies, no friends, and was alone. But you see, despite this and the anti-British sentiment that was growing, amongst the upper classes, the British were still idolised.
Wow, y'all, I didn't know Britain was neutral during the American Civil War. I mean, it kind of makes sense because, like, why choose a side if you don't have to? But I guess there's some, principalities involved. Regarding slavery, Great Britain and Ireland remained officially neutral throughout the American Civil War. It legally recognized the belligerent status of the Confederate States of America, but never recognized it as a nation and neither signed a treaty with it nor ever exchanged ambassadors. But you took that cotton. Over 90% of Confederate trade with Britain ended, causing a severe shortage of cotton by 1862. Okay, so they didn't take the cotton. Sorry for blaming you for taking the cotton. You still took 10% of the cotton. Private British blockade runners sent munitions and luxuries to Confederate ports in return for cotton and tobacco. In Manchester, the massive reduction of available American cotton caused an economic disaster referred to as the Lancashire Cotton Famine. Y'all are eating cotton? Despite the high unemployment, some Manchester cotton workers refused out of principle to process any cotton from America. There you go, leading to a direct praise from President Lincoln, whose statue in Manchester bears a plaque with, there's a statue of Lincoln in that makes me happy. That makes me feel good. Manchester. I'm coming to visit that statue. We're the same, living in different places.
But you see, despite this and the anti-British sentiment that was growing, amongst the upper classes, the British were still idolised. You would see, like, wealthy American industrialists trying to marry into the British aristocracy. Famously, Winston Churchill, the British icon, his mother's American.
To introduce Mr. Churchill, he's a great Englishman. but he's half American.
And America's richest
right.
family, the Vanderbilts, they married into British nobility. However, there was a
Oh, did
constant
they?
feeling, despite being an independent nation, that America always felt like it was under the thumb of the Brits.
Who did the Vanderbilts marry? Vanderbilt marriage into British aristocracy. Consuelo Vanderbilt was the richest American heiress to marry into British aristocracy. Her mother, Alva, was ambitious for her daughter's marriage prospects and named her after Consuelo Luna, a childhood friend. Consuelo Vanderbilt. Her first marriage to the 9th Duke of Marlborough. Cigarettes. An advantageous but loveless marriage. Common during the Gilded Age. Who is this 9th Duke of Marlborough? Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough. Oh, close friend of his first cousin Winston Churchill. I don't recognize any of his children's names other than Churchill. Let's move on.
I'm Jack English, and this 4th of July, celebrate our independence with the most American thing you can do. Telling the British to shove it up their ass.
In 1895, the UK and America embarked on what was known as the Great Rapprochement. The boys put aside their differences and we came together like a fucking WWE tag team.
Awesome.
And it was popping off, man. We aligned, right? It was synergy. We lobbied up and joined forces on our economic, our military, our political, and our diplomatic policies.
All right.
It was fucking beautiful, man. It was like Jimmy Malcory and Chaz Michaels swerving and prancing together. With Wall Street and the City of London becoming financial giants.
Hell yeah.
A new era had dawned. However, by the 1880s, whilst we're meant to be soaring together as a team, the Americans decided to overtake our economy. Fuck. And then, at the worst possible time, a war broke out. Shit. By the 20s, New York City had surpassed London.
Y'all be sure to go to Jimmy the Giant, like and subscribe.
Broke out. Shit. By the 20s, New York City had surpassed London as the financial hub of the world. And by
really?
now, a very distinct American identity and culture had firmly grown.
Wow, that's earlier than I would have
Basically,
expected.
World War I was a turning point in this power struggle, as America refused to join the war until 1917 and avoided any formal military alliances with Britain. And so Britain had to borrow $4 billion after the war, in which the Americans demanded repayments that Britain couldn't afford. And they imposed steep tariffs, and it really strained the relationship between these two nations. The balance of power had officially flipped.
Y'all, don't loan money to family or friends. Just ruins a relationship almost every time. Makes it weird. That's where we went wrong, y'all. Thanks, Grandma, Grandpa. Right? We didn't do it. It was them. It was old people, dead people.
By the Great Depression, America had really sort of taken Britain's stronghold. Like there was a gap in the market in the world economy from the fact that we were struggling, and America rose to the occasion. But you see, as America are now doing better than us, when World War II broke out in 1939, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill dubbed our connection with America as
A special relationship between the British Commonwealth and Empire and the United States of America.
Special relationship.
the American president, Teddy Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. They were them boys.
Yo, look, he can't stand by himself. How did we not recognize that he was so sick?
We were like Lionel Messi and another football guy who they played good football together. To be honest, we were a dream team. It was sick, right? It was good versus evil. These two superpowers, they fused and joined forces, and we were combining our scientific, our financial, and our military capabilities, and obviously, we beat the Nazis. However, the quiet truth is that we didn't have a lot of money. We were like asking the Americans to lend us some money.
More than half a year,
your family will give it to you.
Almost since the beginning of the war, we've heard of American factories working for Britain. The stream of modern weapons is swelling to a flood. You will see an endless chain of steel fighting equipment flowing in to equip a new British offensive machine.
And we had become a little bit dependent on this money. There's no other real way of putting it, but Britain just we weren't ready for World War II. It came at the worst possible time. It cost us way too much money, and just 7 days after America declared victory in Japan and World War II was completely over, the new American president, Truman, he brought a complete end to the Lend-Lease program, and now Britain were fucked. We had no money.
Yo, I don't think Britain had a choice, right? Like, what, like, being bombed by the Nazis, what are you going to do, right?
He brought a complete end to the Lend-Lease program, and now Britain were fucked. We had no money. And so Britain was like, you know, hey guys, I don't know if you've noticed, but like, we're really poor now. And a very famous economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes, he stepped up to help Britain. He was expecting that, you know, because we just sort of won the war together and we were buddies, and a strong Britain means a strong America, we can be trading partners, we can, you know, a bit of goodwill. No! The relationships that guided Britain and America to victory in World War II no longer existed. You see, Teddy Roosevelt was dead. Winston Churchill was no longer prime minister. And the conditions for Britain's recovery were now in different hands.
Now that the war is over, we want to do business with Britain, and Britain wants to do business with us.
Good.
This agreement is good business.
Eventually, help would arrive, but it wouldn't be in the form of a gift. It would be a loan with interest. Trying to get the Americans to give us some fucking money was pretty embarrassing. Like, we had to fucking drag Winston Churchill out of retirement. Like, he wasn't prime minister anymore, and we just said, mate, they like you over there. Can you ask? In 1946, he did a tour of America where he went around, you know, talking to politicians and the general public. And he was like, hey guys, you remember me? You know, war? We won it together. Churchill, bless him, he took a hard job of trying to convince the public, who at the time when surveyed were 58% against supporting Britain financially. Eventually, they finally agreed on the Anglo-American loan. However, it put Britain in a worse financial position than before. And it came with terms. Like, for instance, Britain had taken loans from its colonies and they were in sterling, and we had to convert those loans into dollars. The American dollar had overtaken the British pound to become the dominant global currency in 1944. And like, it got worse for the sterling. In 1949, there was the sterling crisis.
The cause of the crisis is America's phenomenal industrial development, which has unbalanced the old trading equilibrium.
This completely changed the international economy. Britain was fucking swimming in debt and could no longer act like the fucking big cheese. And just like that, culturally, economically, militarily, politically, the United States of America had taken over.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America is asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all.
Now look, it wasn't complete GG's for Britain. Like, we weren't absolutely fucked. The whole rejigging of our economic structure led to the post-war boom, where the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, said, most people have never had it so good. Around the country, industrial towns, the farms, a state of prosperity such as we have never had in my lifetime.
Look at his face.
Nor indeed in the history of this country. Unemployment was lower than it had ever been before and has ever been since. By 1957, 52% of British people, when surveyed, said that they were very happy with life. Which, like, if you know anything about British people, is truly unbelievable. Like, in this era where everyone was happy and not that poor and people looked after, and God, what's happened to this country? A new, thriving music scene had emerged in towns like Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, and London. You see, American rock and roll had found its way into Britain through American soldiers and sailors, etc. And it led to a wave of young British people inspired to make their own music. And one of those groups, around 1964, was a little-known band by the name of the Beatles.
There are rumors around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party. 3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles.
By the next year, the Beatles had 34 songs in the top 100s and 6 number ones in what was being called Beatlemania. And like, yeah, it was around this time, the mid-60s, where a wave of British music was becoming very popular over in America, who had always led in entertainment. And this era was now being dubbed as the British invasion. Britain was dominating the American charts, and like, we were having a cultural impact. You would literally have Americans dressing as if they were British teenagers. So along with a little bit of cultural influence, we did actually bounce back as a financial hub. The City of London, right, a bunch of banky boys, they had kind of found a sort of loophole, a workaround to the American-led Bretton Woods system, which imposed heavy regulations on finance to stop people speculating on very risky trades. In 1946, we reintroduced the sterling area. And by the 1960s, 40% of all international trade was being done in British sterling. This loophole is what birthed offshore banking, and would go on to lead to the euro-dollar market in 1955, which would lead the City of London to regaining the power over finance and becoming the central hub for finance all around the world. And so, you know, we might have lost America, we might have lost our empire, we might have lost our political power, but we did control the money.
Yeah, I've always thought that London over New York had all the money. That's what I've always thought. Why did I think that? I'm not sure. Anyway.
I've got a more calls going out. I need some cable calls because I've got a stop loss.
However, I would argue that this sort of reliance on finance led us to ironically becoming more and more Americanized when it comes to our attitudes towards capitalism. Through, of course, Thatcher. It's always Thatcher. Just expect it. It will always be Thatcher. Now, Thatcher adored America, as her political campaign would follow Ronald Reagan and the free marketeers, which I've done a whole video about. I'll link that below. The journalist Will Hutton.
Yeah, and I reacted to that video. Link on my channel page.
Wrote about Thatcher's mission to make Britain a simulacrum of the United States. Janine Ganesh described the transatlantic delusions of the Westminster governing elite as the political media class became ever more mesmerized by its American equivalent. Thatcher, right, she visited America for the first time in 1967, and in her memos she wrote, "The excitement has never subsided. At each stopover I was met by friendly, open, generous people who took me into their homes and showed me their cities and townships with evident pride. The high point was my visit to NASA Space Center. She found a British engineer working for NASA, and she concluded, this is a living example of the brain drain from which over-regulated, overtaxed Britain was suffering." In spite of the fact that NASA is a very well-funded government agency, somehow that didn't compute.
Right.
There was no way Britain could compete even in more modest areas of technology if we did not learn the lessons of an enterprise economy.
We've gotten in the habit over the last 40 years of thinking that government has the answers. There's very little that government can do as efficiently and as economically as the people can do themselves. And if government would shut the doors and sneak away for about 3 weeks, we'd never miss them. Yes, we can trim the budget. There's enough fat in the federal government that if you rendered it, you could wash the world.
The essence of socialism is that you surrender quite a bit of power over your own life to the state. You pay very high taxes, and they wish to take even higher taxes because they think that politicians can spend money better than the people can spend it.
They use the word people, but what it actually is corporations.
The more you take away, the less there is for private industry, and that's where the creation of wealth comes. So you have to establish very clear limits on the role of government. And really, you know, politicians, I think, should sometimes just be a little bit more modest about their abilities.
Getting greedy.
Her speeches just really became more and more Americanized. Like, the rhetoric she used was just stuff that Americans say. This was a conscious decision. Like, she wanted to bring American-styled rhetoric around freedom and liberty. She wanted to bring that into the British political debate. Like, literally, Thatcher just went on a jolly to America. They were nice to her, gave her some pecan pie, and now she concluded that Britain needed to be like America. And so this would really be like the beginning of the complete Americanization of Britain. As we all know, Thatcher went on to tear down the British-style post-war consensus in place of this much more American-esque politics. And like, there's lots of things she did, but one of the big ones was to target our literal cultural attitudes. She would say that she wants to change the mind and the soul of the Brit, and it seemed to be largely in regard to the idea of like collectivism. You know, a community working together as a society. Infamously, she once said that there is no such thing as society. She was taking American individualism to its absolute ideological extreme.
No country in the world can be immune from its effects. Such is the influence of the American...
I want to read what she said there. They are casting their problems at society. And there's no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families. And no government can do anything except through people. And people must look after themselves first. It is our duty to look after ourselves and then also to look after our neighbors. That seems like an unhealthy mindset to me.
She once said that there is no such thing as society. She was taking American individualism to its absolute ideological extreme.
No country in the world can be immune from its effects. Such is the influence of the American economy on us all. We in Europe have watched with admiration the burgeoning of this mighty American economy. There is a new mood in the United States. A visitor feels it at once. The resurgence of your self-confidence and your national pride is almost tangible. Now the sun is rising in the West.
It'd be from the 80s onwards where American politicians and academics started talking about how the growth in the welfare state undermines work ethic. These were talking points that Thatcher literally just took and brought to Britain. Bring in a cultural focus on strong work ethic and moral authority, personal responsibility. Thatcher would claim things like poverty basically doesn't exist anymore except for personal responsibility. Thatcher would...
There's no primary poverty left in this country. There may be poverty because people don't know how to budget, don't know how to spend their earnings, but such poverty is the product not of social policy but of personal defect. Almost 2 decades later, in her 1996 Nicholas Ridley Memorial Lecture, 6 years after she had been pushed out of number 10 by her own MPs, she insisted again that poverty is not material but behavioral. It's probably a mixture of both, right?
Claim things like poverty basically doesn't exist anymore except for a few lazy people. This Americanized attitude would exist long after Thatcher. In 1997, the former Labour deputy leader John Prescott said the phrase, "We are all middle class now." And it was this...
we are all middle class now. He said that in 1997.
And it was this strange doublethink to believe we're all middle class now, despite the media in this period having this obsession with what was known as benefit scroungers. Shows like Jeremy Kyle, Benefits Britain, Benefit Streets, and newspaper articles about sink estates, etc. Previously, the British attitude towards poverty was an understanding that it wasn't due to laziness or people not working hard enough. There was a strong understanding in the British psyche beforehand that rampant competition in business creates inequality and exploitation, which makes poverty. And from here, we would just follow the American attitudes to so many things. Whether it was around the welfare state or even law and order, things like the war on drugs. We even literally built an American-styled city called Milton Keynes. As time passed, Britain has felt increasingly Americanized in nearly every aspect.
Milton Keynes, how is it an American city? What do you mean? Milton Keynes is a city in Buckinghamshire, England, 50 miles northwest of London. By designation, its area incorporated the existing towns of Bletchley, Finney Stratford, Wolverton, and Stony Stratford, along with another 15 villages and farmland in between. These settlements had an extensive historical record since the Norman Conquest. Wow. 1,400-seat theater, a municipal art gallery, 2 multiplex cinemas, and an ecumenical central church. What does that mean? Oh. The concept and principle that Christians who belong to different Christian denominations should work together. Oh, okay, yeah. What was so American about it, though? How is it built in the style of American city? I don't get that. I don't get it. Little America? Oh, it's like a suburb, maybe? With its long, straight roads and newish buildings, the place has the feel of a North American city, especially the newer ones out in the west, like Denver or Phoenix. Oh, it does kind of look American, I guess. There's a McDonald's. All right.
As time passed, Britain has felt increasingly Americanized in nearly every aspect. When you look at television from the 90s onwards, Friends became a hit show in Britain, and we would import a ton of American TV shows, whether it was MTV or even cartoon shows. Young people would grow up watching these American TV shows and start even using some Americanisms.
We're all Americans now. Join us.
What was called trash TV. Things like the Jerry Springer Show, which was just a show focused on conflict, division, sensationalism, which directly influenced British TV. Things like Jeremy Kyle just shitting on poor people for an hour.
Y'all, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
It's in like reality TV stars and trying to get your 15 minutes of fame. Right. Every fucking Becky and Debs thought she could appear on X Factor and become a superstar overnight. It gave us in part this sort of clout chase culture that you see from Hollywood, where everyone thinks they can be a star and everyone's obsessed with celebrity culture. Not saying we're quite like LA or something, but you know, it definitely has bled into British culture.
In Britain's slumping economy, the fast food business is booming. McDonald's here just had its best year ever. KFC's profits rose 14%.
Wow.
Domino's earnings are up even more.
Don't eat that, yo.
With 1 in 4 adults dangerously overweight and nearly 1 in 5 children, Britain's catching up to America.
And then, mate, you gotta think about the food as well. The rise.
Britain is the fat man of Europe with 63% of UK adults overweight. Yo, I'm sorry. Don't eat that.
Britain's catching up to America.
And then, mate, you gotta think about the food as well. The rise in British obesity. We're now the 6th most obese country on the planet. And British attitudes towards food and eating have become more Americanized. Instead of having like family meals where you all sit down together, which was traditional, now people kind of eat on the go a bit more. All our fast food has grown in the country and portion size have got bigger. Hasn't got quite to the extent of American size. I'm pretty sure we have laws to stop that, but we still have king size, big size, all that sort of stuff, which has affected portion sizes of British food. We have become more consumerist. I mean, like Black Friday didn't exist in Britain until about 2010, which again, we're not quite as extreme about, but we have become more consumerist over time. Our working culture also followed the American model. In the 80s and 90s, American companies moved away from the idea of like long-term strategy and moved towards more like quarterly earnings-driven models, which has led to less stable employment. Short-term contract culture, outsourcing, downsizing, longer working hours, which has euphemistically been called flexible workforces. But the problem is this whole idea of like a leaner workforce has led to far less job stability, which is having massive effects on the British psyche. There was a big survey done and they looked at Britain where they had followed the American model the closest. And it shows that Britain has had the worst decline in employee satisfaction in terms of employment security, where job satisfaction levels in terms of security dropped from 70% in 1985 down to just 48% by 1995.
Wow.
And then also you got stuff like...
Another manifestation of the Americanization of the UK and other European workplaces other than the long hours culture is the increasing levels of job insecurity. Since the Industrial Revolution in Europe, few white-collar managerial professional workers have experienced high levels of job insecurity. The European survey by ISR of 400 companies in 17 countries, representing 8 million workers throughout Europe, found most European countries showed a substantial decline from 1985 to 95 in perceived job security, with the most Americanized Britain showing the worst decline in employee satisfaction in terms of employment security, dropping from 70% to 48%. The big questions about this development are, is the trend towards a short-term contract, long hours, and intrinsically job insecure workplace the way forward for us? No, it's not. Don't do that. Damn. I know it's changing in America. Younger people are not putting up with these 60-hour work week, even the 40-hour work week. They're like, we don't gotta do it. So hopefully that will influence the UK too. Hopefully, maybe.
Down to just 48% by 1995. Oh, and then also you got stuff like British assets and major companies being sold off to the Americans.
What is so spectacular about America's business presence in the United Kingdom?
It's mostly its scale. They have just got so many businesses that they've owned for a long time and that have expanded. But there have been these two great prongs of American expansion in the last 15 years. The tech businesses, so the big 5 or 6, whoever you want to count, Apple, Google, Microsoft and so on, but also private equity. So private equity is a much more under the radar activity, but it's dominated by US companies, Apollo, KKR, Silver Lake, and these Blackstone, of course, and these companies have really taken over huge swathes of the British economy.
Although Britain has always historically been very closely tied to America, being in the EU meant that Europe was our biggest trading partner. However, in 2016, we voted to leave the EU. And like very quickly, everything changed around that sort of time. 2016, Trump burst onto the scene, and you're seeing like a rise in populism. And in this time, I believe we entered a new era of Americanization.
We're here down here to show a little bit of support for Trump, because all the nutcase lefties was on the streets yesterday crying into their little banners that they got provided with, and obviously George Soros.
I would argue that our relationship with the EU acted as a bit of a counterbalance.
They make British Trumpers? I'm sorry, y'all.
George Soros.
I would argue that our relationship with the EU acted as a bit of a counterbalance to American influence. However, it was very interesting to see the sort of similarities between the Trump campaign and the Brexit campaign. With people like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage, our politics started to look less and less British and more American. I'll be honest, historically, us Brits, when it comes to politics, we're always a little bit dull and boring. But Brexit was a change, right? It saw like more sloganeering, more like publicity stunts. You have fucking Boris Johnson whipping around on a zip line and rugby tackling children to try and get us out of the EU. The debates got spicier, and you would see people making just claims that weren't backed by facts.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim. That was one of the mistakes I think that the Leave campaign made.
Hang on a moment.
Like, if you hyper-focus in on Nigel Farage, he's quite an interesting one, because Brexit, like, you know, there were different reasons people voted, but a lot of it was to do with reducing immigration. However, Nigel Farage really did try and push like an American freedom angle to it.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Oh, no. Oh, no. I thought this video was going to talk about fast food and American sitcoms. I'm sorry, y'all.
A day that the British public, I don't think, has even thought about since, let alone celebrated. And that is interesting, right? Because, like, culturally, British people and Americans do perceive the idea of freedom quite differently. When British people are surveyed and asked, what's your number one priority when it comes to economic freedom? The most common answer is better public services. When you also ask British people, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word government regulation? 65% of people think that regulation means public safety and security, whilst only 35% think that it means like limitations and hassles, bureaucracy, red tape, that kind of thing.
I bet it's the opposite in
I couldn't find the exact same
America.
study, but the narrative of like big government and over-regulation is a rhetoric that tends to chime more with the American voters.
Very highly respected Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage really loves, like, he loves Donald Trump. He does. I mean, here's a picture of him and Donald Trump's son, and I don't know, man. Kind of looks like a Make-A-Wish kid. And you see him wearing, like, MAGA hats and stuff, and I don't know, I couldn't picture a British person wearing a hat of some charismatic leader. It's just not really what British people are like. But Farage, he doesn't have any shame about it. And when you look at the Reform Party's manifesto and you look up the term regulation, it comes up quite a few times, and it's always this rhetoric of like the nanny state. Very American style rhetoric. Like even in the Conservatives manifesto, when they talk about regulation, it's not quite as like negative. Nigel Farage has also said that he wants to move Britain to like an American style private healthcare system.
And I think we're going to have to move to an insurance-based system of healthcare.
No.
If I was able to do that through the marketplace of an insurance company, than just us trustingly giving 100 billion a year to central government and expecting them to organise the healthcare service from cradle to grave.
Despite the fact that when you actually poll British people on that topic, 93% of British people support a free NHS. 82% believe it should be paid for by taxes. In America, the majority do want free healthcare, but it's only 57%. Well, only 43% would like a government-run healthcare system. And you really do see the Reform Party adopting like the Elon Musk, Trump, MAGA kind of talking points. There's this one Reform Party MP called Rupert Lowe, and he was tweeting the other day about the woke mind virus. And he was saying how he's jealous of Elon Musk's Doge department. And like on the most extreme end, you even see people calling for like Trump and Elon Musk to take over Britain.
Honestly, Trump taking over might not be such a bad idea. Cheaper energy, food on shelves, affordable, and no one arrested for suggesting Britain's being unsafe is worth it, so we can be kind. So Don, how about it, my fella? We've already got part of Scotland. Invade the rest of us. We'll surrender faster than you can say, respect order. The country that repelled the Nazis can't even repel a rubber dinghy. Make us the 51st state of the US of A, and let's forget Stalin. I beg your pardon, I've done it again. Starmer.
And at some point,
I would accept Britain as the 51st state, but I don't think it's a good idea. I think Britain would lose a lot of its individual identity or change the culture too much. I don't know. seems wrong somehow.
It becomes hard to know if they're joking or not. And as we've seen Elon Musk's growing interest in having power over Britain, he's pledged to give £100 million to the Reform Party. If you want me to make a video about Elon Musk trying to influence British politics, comment below. There's been this big back and forth over this trade agreement and the terms. Like, we didn't want to, at one point we didn't want their chloroform fried chicken, but it has felt that lately we have become more reliant on America, and this seems to be influencing us more and more.
They've not just bought up assets like property, but they've bought what I call the bridges and the pipes of our economy. So in medieval times, the thing that you wanted to own was a bridge where you could charge people a toll and where it was the only way from one side of the river to another.
Right.
And that's exactly what the Americans have done in so many areas. So, for example, if you do dating through Bumble or Tinder, you're maybe dating a British person, but you're paying an American for the privilege.
No, I'm probably pissed off a lot of Americans in this video. I don't blame Americans. Americans are good people. It's their political system that fucking sucks. And the way geopolitics works is it's inevitable. We live in a globalized world and you're always going to take influence from different nations. And like historically, we force Britishness on the entire world. Now America is doing the same. But it just seems a shame to me that Britain seems to want to follow America anywhere. We would follow them off the edge of a cliff. And we don't seem to ever stop and ask, like, to what benefit? Many Americans themselves feel tired of this sort of like rat race culture that's consumed them. Working too much to see their friends and family. Too little time and energy to pursue their own passions. Working unstable jobs, earning far too little to sort of envision a happy future. With all this talk we have these days around British cultural values, I feel like the Americanization of Britain has just been something no one talks about. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, jump in the Discord, we'll chat about this and much more. Peace.
Be sure to go to the Jimmy the Giant and like and subscribe. Peace, Jimmy. Wow, I think Britain is fine. Like, I've heard conflicting attitudes about the NHS, but man, y'all don't want that privatized insurance. The health insurance stuff. I don't think insurance should be for profit. You know, people's lives are at stake. Even home insurance. It's pretty messed up. We're going through these fires in LA right now. Insurance companies just decided that they will not continue insuring people. People just find out their insurance is terminated, and then their house burns down, and they're up the creek without a paddle, or a motor, or a life vest. Anyway, y'all be sure to go to Jimmy the Giant, like and subscribe. I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me Coffee folks. Thank y'all for watching this with me. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you next time. Later.